And in which war did you serve, Dick?
I was in the Korean conflict.
What was your branch of service?
I was in the Navy. I was a reservist on active duty. I graduated from college in 1952 when there was a draft. I didn't want to be drafted and be shot at. In 1952, the war was still going on. So I searched for ways of evading the Army legally. And the Air Force didn't want me for pilot training. I enlisted for OCS in Newport, Rhode Island for the Navy, and went at the end of August for their 4-month program. Graduated at the end of December 1952, and after Christmas leave, went to sonar school in Key West, Florida for 6 weeks. Lovely time of the year to go to Key West, January, February. The sonar was a brand new piece of equipment that was used to identify mines. Very high frequency sound going out there, and the sound, when it bounced back, was able to show on the screen things like mines on the bottom of the sea, or moored, roughly the size of a 55-gallon oil drum. And that equipment new then used vacuum tubes, which 20 years later were obsolete. So after that school, I went to my first ship, the USS Shoveler, AM, a minesweeper, steel-hulled minesweeper left over from the Second World War. And that assignment was kind of a holding pattern, because they wanted to put me on a ship where this new sonar gear had been installed. So that summer of '53, I went to new construction in Mare Island, California, the USS Bluebird. Wooden-hulled, aluminum and stainless steel, which is non-magnetic. Magnetism changes will trigger certain kinds of mines. On that ship, I went around through the canal to Charleston, which is the home port of the mine force in the Atlantic, and trained out of there, mostly going out in the day. We leave at 7:38 in the morning, come back at 5 in the evening. While we were out at sea, we'd be streaming gear to play like we were cutting mines, finding them. They were all dummies, of course. Then, in the summer of '54, I was transferred to another new construction in Quincy, Massachusetts, the Frigate Bird, another ship of the same class with the same kind of gear, this sonar gear, and was on that for the rest of my active duty. I was released in December of 1955.
What was the process of, I understand you didn't come across any live mines, pretty much trained
No.
for it. What was the process when you come across mines in training? Were they blown in place? How were they dealt with?
I mean, in the real world, if we had come across a mine that was actually live, well, there are various kinds of mines. One is just a mine that's anchored maybe 10 feet under the surface, so that if a passing ship hits it, it explodes. That kind of mine you sweep, that is, you get to bob to the surface by cutting the anchor cable. And then when it pops to the surface, you can presumably see it, and then you bang away at it with your Tommy gun or with your twin 20s, which is all the gunnery we had. A second kind of mine was a magnetic mine, which is detonated by changes in the magnetic field. And when that happens, you pass a magnetic field away from your ship. And the expectation is that you'll blow the mine up harmlessly. Third kind of mine is a pressure mine set off by changing pressure as the ship passes by. So we had devices for changing the pressure and presumably also exploding the mine harmlessly. Then the fourth kind of mine was acoustic mines, where the sound of the engine and the propellers would set off the mine. So we had an acoustic device that just simply, when you just put it out into the water, would bang away. It was just a hammering device, and presumably that would explode the mines far enough away from the ship to be harmless. But this was all play in the sense that we were practicing on dummy mines. I was never on a ship that actually swept a live mine. That was done in Korea. Something like 5 out of the 10 ships that the Navy lost in Korea were minesweepers.
Oh, really?
It was a very high attrition rate. I didn't know that when I was assigned to the minesweepers.
Did you go to near Korea or to Korea on a minesweeper?
No, I never. Farthest I got was about 30 miles the other side of San Francisco. There were other guys on other ships that were actually in Korea doing the minesweeping with live mines.
Well, what I'd like to do is you went to, back up a little bit, you went to OCS, you were accepted to OCS.
Yes.
In order to attend OCS, did you first have to go to a basic training of any sort?
No. OCS was the basic training. We were enlisted men at that point. OCSR, Officer Candidate Seaman Recruit. Seaman Recruit is the lowest enlisted grade in the Navy. So then when we successfully completed the course, we were commissioned and shipped out into the fleet.
Do you have any unique experience? What did you think of that course? What were some of the thoughts you might have had? Did you find it kind of easier than you thought, or much more challenging? Or?
It was a lot of rote work, memorization. I don't have much recollection for what was learned. We had a series of courses. It was a well spelled out program. I was in the 8th group to go through the Navy OCS program in Newport. There was a new group that came in every 2 months, and it was a 4-month program. So the program had been started roughly a year and a half before I got there.
Do you remember any of the instructors particularly? Or?
Not particularly. This was, for many of them, the first shore duty that they had after a period of 4 to 6 years at sea. So they were all, or most of them, 28-year-old kids. You know, we were joining them at the 6 years behind them. I do remember one of the instructors in navigation, who was a chief quartermaster, petty officer, and he was just super, very clear. And as quartermaster, he had done all those things that he was teaching us to do, including celestial navigation. That's not done now. Loran was in its infancy at that point. And of course, the GPS had not been invented for another 50 years.
Navigation was very different then.
Sure is.
So your first assignment was on a a minesweeper, and all your assignments were on minesweeper.
All 3 assignments were on minesweepers, except when I was sent to school.
So can you just kind of describe most people wouldn't understand, and keeping that in mind, what a typical day was for you on a minesweeper?
Well, at sea, you'd be on the bridge, one officer at least on the bridge, overseeing how the ship was going, giving commands to the helmsman and to the person who was controlling the engines. And if we were at sea to go through the drills, that is practice streaming the gear, everybody on board the ship would be doing something. There'd be a crew that would run the ship, another crew that would stream the gear, and there was some, of course, coordination between the two. And then there'd be 2 or 3 guys cooking the meals. If we were simply steaming, as one ship I was on, well, a couple ships steamed from Long Beach to Portland, Oregon, and back, and then around a different ship from Long Beach to Charleston. You'd be steaming regular watches, 4 on, 8 off.
Steaming simply means you're moving, you're not transporting,
moving a ship from one place to another. Yeah, steaming comes from the way in which Navy ships used to be propelled by steam, coal fired. All the ships I was on had diesel engines, but when we were moving the ship at sea, it was still called steaming. One of the things that was true of all these ships is that they were small. They were well below the size of destroyers. The first one, the leftover from the Second World War. I can't remember how many men it had on. I think it was 80 or something like that, and 8 or 9 officers. The other 2 ships, the new construction ships, had 35 men, 4 officers. And that's a different kind of world than the battleship or aircraft carrier world. You have to be more flexible. You have to know more jobs. You don't have to be quite so precise. Precise isn't the word. You don't have to pay quite as much attention to the things that. What do you want off? The things that the Navy tells you to do and all the instructions. You have to be somewhat adaptable. More flexibility, more fun, more responsibility. One of the things I enjoyed doing most was driving the ship, meaning stand up there in the bridge and give the commands to tell the ship to speed up or slow down or move right, left. And the ship handling was fun, bringing it in and taking it out from port.
That's not something that you would ever had the opportunity on a larger ship, being an O2.
Maybe if I'd had 2 or 3 years on a destroyer, I would finally get to be officer of the deck and be able to do that. But there's some training involved with the small ships. Turns out I was pretty good at it. Once when one of my commanding officers was considerably hung over in the morning, he didn't want to take the ship out himself, so he said, "Miller, you do it." He told me how to do it, which I thought was impossible, his way. So I did it my way and didn't tell him. So we got out satisfactorily. No problem, didn't run into anybody. And we finally getting out into the stream, going to where we were supposed to do our exercises for the day. He said, "Miller, you didn't do it like I told you." I said, right. That I could never get away with on a destroyer or bigger.
There were no consequences for those actions?
No consequences. He was glad I did it. After all, he was hungover.
He might not have been giving you the best instructions.
That's right. One of the things that was good background for me in particular was my experience as a camp counselor when I was in college. I was head of the sailing department for 4 years, so I knew something about very small boats, knew something about navigation. I knew what the navigational system was, the buoys and lights and stuff. So that helped me, gave me a little bit of a head start. Along the way at camp, I learned how to tie some knots. So on one of the ships I was on, one of the seaman strikers, one of the pretty low enlisted men, challenged me to a race so you could tie a bowline faster. He thought that since I was an officer, I couldn't do it. I beat him. He was humiliated. And all our people in the deck gang were laughing at him.
You have any other experiences or stories aboard ship that you can recall that stand out in your mind? Unique or unusual?
Nothing. Maybe when we end, I'll think of something that I should have said.
Okay. Well, how did you stay in touch with family? You know, a young man.
Well, I wasn't married at that point. Didn't get married till 6 months after my release. So staying in touch with the family involved writing letters to my girlfriend who became my wife, to my parents, and a few other people. There was no communication by cell phone. We didn't have cell phones. I very seldom used the landline. I don't remember using telegraphs, but telegraphs were still in use at that point.
What was I know you were talking about you said there was 4 cooks or so aboard the ships that you were on. What was the food like? What were they cooking? Were they cooking sea rats or were they actually cooking meals?
They were actually cooking meals. They were pretty good meals. In big ships, the officers' mess is different from the enlisted men's mess. But on the ships I was on, the officers ate the same food that the enlisted men got. We just ate it in the wardroom, different location. But it was the same food.
It was all pretty much freshly cooked.
I'm sorry?
It was all pretty much freshly cooked.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Did you do you recall any issues with supplies? Did you pretty much have whatever you might have needed when you needed it, or was there issues with supplies?
I don't remember any problems with supplies. We had to be careful about canned goods on the non-magnetic ships, the 2 that I was on. There was a particular place, a cabinet, where the canned goods are supposed to be kept. So we couldn't overstock and store canned goods outside this locker. Seal cans are very magnetic, and they will affect almost anything you're doing on that kind of ship. But those ships were made of non-magnetic materials. And we would have to go through a procedure for reducing the magnetic signature of the ship. This is called degaussing. Degaussing. There are degaussing ranges in various locations in ports. The one we used was in Charleston at the shipyard. You passed the ship over the degaussing coils, and then you could adjust the coils in the ship to further reduce the magnetic signature of the ship. This was done to reduce the probability that your own minesweeper is going to set off somebody else's magnetic mine.
A lot to it.
Yeah.
During your 3 years, did you go on leave? Take leave time?
I took some leave, but not very much. I sold a bunch of leave time back to the government when I got out. So that was one way of saving some money, which I felt I would need when I became a civilian again. No, there are only a couple of things that were of recreational interest. First ship I was on was sent to the Rose Festival in Portland to represent the Navy. So we got to run around Portland, and I guess we smelled the roses. Then we were in San Francisco. I got to Yosemite, Muir Woods, some other places, Monterey. So that was kind of like going on leave, but for a weekend. I don't remember doing that much on the East Coast.
What did you think of the officers? They were a pretty tight-knit group, I imagine, on the boat. They were small.
Yes, they were very nice. They were very able, tight-knit group. On the first one, with 9 officers, you're supposed to have 8. I was the excess. They had 8 bunks. I didn't have a bunk assigned to me, as they were expecting me to go elsewhere, which happened in a couple of months. And that was a group that was maybe 2 or 3 regular officers, that is career type officers, and some reservists on active duty like me were the rest. On the other 2 ships, the number of officers in each was 4, and the skipper was a Naval Academy graduate, and the other 3 in each case were reservists who were serving active duty. All very able people. We got along very well.
There was no animosity or anything. Oh, here's a reservist. You're not real. You're not.
If there was, I didn't feel it. On the other 2 ships, where there were 4 officers, the Naval Academy graduate, the skipper, was outnumbered 3 to 1.
I can understand. Did you keep a journal at all?
No. We were supposed to keep journals as part of the junior officer training. Mm-hmm. And they were inspected as part of the administrative inspections of the ship. So we were supposed to write into the journals what we did every day. That was supposed to last for 2 years. My journal was looked at for one administrative inspection. And the only thing I had written in there was a day's work in navigation, which is taking some star sites and working them out. So that was kind of embarrassing, I felt, to have such a slack journal. Then when the report from the administrative inspection team came back, one of the problems they had was that the officers were not keeping their journals. For example, there was no indication of a day's work in navigation. Well, that was the only thing I had put in my journal. Had they read it at all? Don't know.
Was your journal the only journal they looked at in that inspection? Or
I don't remember. It may have been.
Well, what I'm going to do here then, Dick, is I'm going to move it a little bit toward after service.
Okay.
And obviously, if something comes to mind that's important to you during service, feel free. Okay. So where were you at when your service ended, when your last day, and did there anything stick out? Was that a unique day for you or your last day in service?
When I was released from active duty, at the end of December, just before Christmas, I was in Charleston, which is where my ship was located. Mustered out, and a friend of mine on another ship, and I drove to New York, where he lived. And as I remember, I spent that Christmas break with my girlfriend, the one who became my wife, and then went back to Michigan, which is where my parents were living. And I felt that I really ought to do some more education. And I thought I would try economics. So I enrolled in the graduate school at Columbia to see if I liked it. So that was the spring of 1956. I liked the subject matter, but I did not like Columbia. So I transferred to Yale. Stayed there as a graduate student for 4 years. In 1960, left to become a member of the faculty at Wesleyan in Middletown, and stayed on the faculty until 2006, 46 years. I've been retired since then, although I've taught a course 3 or 4 times since then.
They called you back in.
They called me back in. They, what's the word? They re-upped me.
Yep.
And I got to do a fair amount of traveling. There's enormous flexibility and college education. So I spent leave time at MIT, at Berkeley, at Yale, Antitrust Division of the Justice Department in Washington, New Zealand Institute of Economic Research at Wellington, and then also, while I was teaching at Wesleyan, moonlighted a couple times at a couple of other institutions. So that's one element of flexibility, which is nice to have. In addition, I had a fair amount of flexibility in what courses I taught. So I was able in a college to wander around a bit among the fields in economics. I would not have been allowed to do that at a university. Whereas one of my colleagues pointed out, the borders are patrolled, meaning faculty are very jealous of their particular subfield of their discipline. So anyway, I've wandered all over the map in the courses I've taught, which has been fun.
The schools that you attended, did the government help you as far as the GI
Oh,
Bill?
yes, I had the GI Bill. That was a very big help. I took all 36 months, which is what we were allowed. That plus my wife's job supported us through the graduate school years.
Did you make any close friendships while you were in the service that still existed beyond your service dates and even to today, possibly?
Yeah. No, not really. Indeed, I suspect that most of those people I knew are now dead. The commanding officers and some of the other officers were older than I. I did check on one of the commanding officers. He had graduated from the Naval Academy, I think about 1948, and he made Rear Admiral, was head of the Naval Telecommunications facility in Virginia, I think. I never got in touch with him. I probably should have.
So, how do you feel your military experience influenced your life later on? Do you think it influenced dramatically or have any impact at all?
Oh yeah, it had big influence. In addition to paying for an education, one of the big things I learned in the Navy was what an organization chart is and the associated lines of authority and responsibility, and the fact that authority has to go along with responsibility. And some of the people I observe in civilian life haven't learned that, may never learn it. It also, the Naval Service also gave me the opportunity to get older. That is, focus more on what I thought I wanted to do, and be able to adapt to the real world better. At 21, I don't think I would have done well in civilian life if I had to get a job. 25, 26, 29, a different matter.
Are you involved in any VFW, any veterans organizations?
The requirement when I got out was to stay in the reserves for a total of 8 years, 3 years active duty plus 5 years. And I was subject to recall. I also had the option, if I wanted, to join a reserve unit drilling roughly once a week and then going off for 2 weeks in the summer for further training. I joined the reserve unit in New Haven and went to a couple of 2-week summer training sessions in a couple of places. And I can't remember exactly when that petered out. I kept my commission until sometime in 1964. And at that point, Vietnam was heating up. And I had seen in the Korean conflict a number of people who were left over from the Second World War called back for Korea, including Ted Williams. And I thought, that isn't for me. So at that point, I resigned my commission. I was spending the year at MIT, and at lunch, the round table with 8 or 10 people, all economists sitting there, talking about things, including the Vietnamese War. I leaned over to the guy next to me, whom I had just gotten to know, and I said, I just resigned my commission in the Navy. And he whispered back, that may have been the smartest thing you ever did. I don't think I would have been called back, but that was not a chance I wanted to take.
Well, Dick, is there anything you'd like to add that we have not covered?
I don't think so. Nothing comes to mind.
Well, I want to thank you for your service. And
you're welcome.
Allow me into your home to do this interview.
Nice to have you. Nice to talk to you. Nice to get to chat with you. Thank you.